Welcome to MindSpeak. It's a real pleasure to be hosting Dr. Kituyi today. But I would like to start by condoling the doctor on the loss of his son, Ivar. I in fact had the privilege of meeting Ivar a couple of times some years ago, and he was a wonderful chap, and we had a really great conversation. And Dr. Kituyi was sharing quite personal comments this morning, and I can't imagine what it feels like. I feel we extend all our sympathies, and if we could have a minute's silence, I think that's appropriate. Thank you. May Ivar's soul rest in peace. It is a pleasure to have the Secretary General of UNCTAD here today, Dr. Kituyi. He took office on the 1st of September 2013, but we'd in fact met a long time ago, if you remember. And each time I met the doctor, he sort of tickled my intelligence, made me think, cracked a few jokes, and it was really a very sort of attractive interaction. And when I started tweeting about him coming today, I got so many people telling me, Ali Khan, what a great guy, what a great individual. So I'm really excited to have the doctor here. And if I may just start with just telling you a little bit about Dr. Kituyi. He's the Secretary General of UNCTAD, which is governed by 194 member states, is the United Nations body responsible for dealing with development issues, particularly international trade, the main driver of development. UNCTAD says its work can be summed up in 3 words: think, debate, and deliver. Dr. Kituyi of Kenya became UNCTAD's 7th Secretary General on the 1st of September 2013, has an extensive background as an elected official, academic, holder of high government office, wide-ranging experience in trade negotiations and in Africa and its broader international economics and diplomacy. Born in Bungoma District, Western Kenya in 1956, studied political science, international relations at the University of Nairobi and at Makerere University in Kampala. Went on to earn an MPhil in 1986 and a doctorate in 1989 from the University of Bergen in Norway. Dr. Kituyi has served as a researcher at Norway's Christian Michelsen Institute from 1989 to 1991, Program Director of the African Center for Technology Studies in Nairobi from 1991 to 1992, elected to Parliament in 92 in Kenya, was twice re-elected, Minister of Trade and Industry from 2002 to 2007. During that period as Minister, chaired for 2 years COMESA and the African Trade Ministers' Council, served as Chairman of the Council of Ministers of the African, Caribbean and Pacific Group of States, lead negotiator for Eastern and Southern African ministers during the European Union ACP Economic Partnership Agreement negotiations. From 2008 to 2012, a member of a team of experts advising the presidents of the nations of the East African Community on how to establish more effective regional economic links. From 2011 to 2012 was a consultant for the African Union Commission. Immediately prior to becoming Secretary General, Dr. Kituyi was Chief Executive of the Kenya Institute of Governance based in Nairobi. And during 2012, Dr. Kituyi also served as a non-resident fellow of the African Growth Initiative of the Brookings Institution in Washington. And I think that doesn't even say it all, because really, pretty impressive. The Daktari is really, I think, an intellectual giant, in our space, and you've just got to hear what he's got to tell us. Daktari, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ali Khan, ladies and gentlemen. I always try to portray me as a very intelligent person. That means I don't have to try very hard. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk a little bit about my sense of dynamics globally affecting Africa, challenges for the region, and perhaps a few words about challenges and opportunities for Kenya. And I want to do that without trying to sound too clever. It means I'll not be using any script. I want to share with you my sense from a perspective as the head of a United Nations agency, but also as a very passionate believer in the possibilities of Africa and a frustrated believer in the capacity of Kenya to do much better than it's doing. On the 24th of September this year, most of the leaders of the 194 countries of the world will be meeting in New York at a special session of the General Assembly of the UN to sign a very ambitious program. The post-2015 Sustainable Development Goals is a political declaration that will rid the world of extreme poverty by 2030. That there will be major movement in social inclusion around the world that will banish poverty as we know it today from the surface of this earth. The ambitious goals call for very substantial scaling up of resources. But if we just compute what governments are being able to put on the table, what official development assistance is likely to be over the next 15 years, and we cost that against the projected budget of what it takes, we have a deficit of $2.5 trillion that needs to be filled. Many countries are asking, how will we be able to deal with this? How do we close this gap? I start from this point because there is heightened global ambition that normal service cannot continue. And there is a commitment that will be made by your president, among others, that most of the action to banish extreme poverty, to garner inclusive prosperity, is going to be domestic action. That apart from the normal government budgets, government is going to do smart planning to leverage public monies to attract first and foremost domestic private money and make your country attractive enough for private foreign money to also come in. We at the international level are trying to nudge on the different reserves of unspent money, and there's a lot of it. Pension funds alone hold $22 trillion, which is rarely put into developmental work. Sovereign wealth funds from Qatar to Norway and a few other places stock up trillions of more dollars. There will be competition for this money. The winners are those who are ready to be purposefully clear about where they want to take their countries, how they have a convergence between the declared statement of destination and the conduct they have, both as governments, as citizens, as enterprising people. Over the next few moments that I share with you, I want to keep coming back to the issue of coherence. How do you relate different activities of different arms of government to a shared purpose? How do you relate national ambitions with national behavior? How do you relate personal conduct with the stated public goals? Where is the coherence? Where is the line running through your stated goals and your actual activity? Kenya has a pride of place as one of the countries with the most sophisticated intelligentsia in Africa. From where I sit, I see the phenomenal respect that young Kenyan men and women have earned globally when they are faced up to the challenges of employment. in the private, public service. But of course, we are normal anomalies. I even believe if you had a more comprehensive policy of strengthening Kenyan participation in international public service, you'll have a lot more Kenyans working internationally than you have today. But the few that get there, mostly by their own efforts or by efforts of certain friends elsewhere, have done your country very proud. That capacity represents the potential that you can do great things at home. And as we talk about where you are coming from and where you're going, we have to always see, is there any line that mobilizes this phenomenal reservoir of talent, of potential, of capacity, and puts it to good use for a shared goal and vision? My organization is the leading international institution in tracking the movements of investment around the world. Every year we publish the go-to document for the whole world called the World Investment Report, which documents trends in investment flows, challenges, and opportunities. This year I launched the World Investment Report 2015 in Brussels about a month ago. In this report, the number of trends that are really interesting for Africa. First of all, that over the past 20 years, since 1995, the stock of foreign direct investment in Africa has grown very dramatically from $90 billion in 1995 to $700 billion in 2014. There are some countries which are having a very, very steady and rapid expansion of FDI flows. There are some which are ahead of others, but they are slowing down. There are some shared challenges, but also smart solutions for some and not everybody. In our report this year, first of all, we saw that FDI flows to Africa in 2014 was flat at $54 billion, very much the same as in 2013. But in this basket, there are a number of interesting statistics. The largest recipient of FDI to Africa last year was South Africa with $5.7 billion, followed very closely by Congo Republic at 5.5, then Mozambique, $4.9 billion. Mozambique received more FDI than Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Burundi, and Rwanda put together. And half of the flow to East Africa is $2.1 billion, which went to Tanzania. So you should put yourself in perspective, because I hear a lot of, we are all big, we are happening. Be humbled by the truth first before you define where you think you're going. Okay, I mean, after that is Egypt at 4.8, Nigeria at 4.7, Tanzania and DRC at 2.1% each. Kenya is not appearing there. But there is a number of other challenges that we are bringing to the fore this year. Africa received $54 billion in FDI. The stock of foreign direct investment in the continent has been growing very substantially. But there is something worrisome that we're dealing with at a global level, which is investment-related tax evasion by multinational corporations. I mean, there is tax they pay, there's certain exemptions are given, but you see the character of many foreign investment corporations into Africa particularly, and in most of the developing world, they set up a holding company in a tax holiday, often in the Caribbean, you know, and then they pretend they are investing here out of that destination and not the mother country. Reason, there is growing governance and demands of transparency at home on how you account for what you earn. So profit shifting, which is many times tax avoidance behavior, both legal and not so legal, is easier to do from offshore registered shell companies. In our first quantification of the phenomenon in the world, for the first time, we published this year, that the level of resource hemorrhage out of developing countries because of tax avoidance related to investment, international investment, accounted for $100 billion. That means what is stolen is about twice as much as what is invested in 1 year. That's one challenge that we have to face globally. But at home, there are a few other challenges that you have to deal with across the continent. You are going to compete with areas where people are more purposeful about where they're trying to go. The investments that are coming, if you look at the stock of investment we're looking at, it's not so much how much democracy you have, how much freedom your NGOs have. There's no way that DRC Congo could get double as much money in direct investment as Kenya if this was the measure of where the money goes. So don't ever cheat yourself that it has to do with democracy. The first track for FDI in Africa has been into extractive industry, minerals, petroleum. Mozambique is happening because of natural gas. It has one of the largest natural gas deposits in the world, comparable to Qatar and the North Sea gas fields of Norway. Similarly, DRC is basically extractives, that in spite of all the political chaos, there's very substantial route to profit making that is seen by the investors. Tanzania is also substantially because of the natural gas in Songo and Mtwapa area. Countries like your own, which are excited about the prospects of petroleum, have had reversals because of the global dampened mood in the petroleum sector, particularly oil. And I'll come to that briefly when I get properly here. As countries aspire to do the question, how can we be able to get rid of poverty? Some of us on the outside saying, you are facing a very major challenge. Because look at it this way. In 1994, China had about 46% of its population living below the poverty line. That's basically the same as LDCs, most African countries, 46%. Over the next 15 years, China grew at more than 10% per annum for 15 years. At the end of that period, it still had 12% of the population below the poverty line. Now you are saying that LDCs, these African countries, over the next 15 years are going to grow better than China did for 15 years. If they don't just reduce it to 12%, but they go to zero in extreme poverty. What does it take? If we have faith that it has to happen, there has to be mobilization of the intelligentsia. There has to be a certain way of changing our thinking by young thinkers like the majority of my audience here. Not only have a sense of self-belief, but start pushing for a convergence between what is right and what is being done. Priority setting. Coherence between different agencies of government. Coherence between actions of institutions of governance and economic realities in a country. Another of the reports that my organization published this year is the Economic Development in Africa report, which is a major report for the UN. We publish every year on how things are going in Africa. And one of the things that has been really disturbing us is, over the past 10 years, Africa, in terms of GDP, grew more steadily than any other region of the world, averaging about 5%. Some countries like Ethiopia doing more than 10% for a decade. Chaotic Nigeria doing 7% GDP per capita for 10 years, except for 2 years. Even Kenya, with its dip around election time and recoveries after election, still managing to average slightly above 5% GDP growth. The anomaly is Africa realized growth without development. Your GDP was growing, but you're not creating jobs. Livelihoods were not improving. Politically, whatever system you have, jobless growth is not sustainable in a developing country. Then the challenges become, what is it that you're not doing right that has to be done better? In our report this year, we said there's a phenomenal capacity for creating employment, where employment is being created in the services sector with very limited, clear government policy on growing the services sector. Across the continent, 32% of Africa's GDP growth, 32% of Africa's employment creation in the past 1 year was out of services. In 30 of the 54 African countries, services accounted for more than 50% of GDP growth. Services are creating the employment, already more than double what manufacturing is doing. That's something good to be proud of. Some countries have done very well. You go to tourism, Seychelles, Mauritius have delivered phenomenal returns on tourism services. You go to transport, Djibouti, Ethiopia, Kenya have been the champions of the continent. Telecoms, South Africa and Kenya have been phenomenal, exemplary leaders. Cultural products like movie making, Burkina Faso, Nigeria, phenomenal. Financial services, South Africa, Nigeria, Morocco. Then you say, why are they not feeding the cow that is giving most milk? Because most of these countries do not have any clear policy on services. Let's look at Kenya. Just 3 examples. When you talk to an average younger Kenyan, like many of you, you are proud that for a change, many of the international visitors to your country do not go to Gibera, they go to the IHAB. Yeah? That we have something world-class to show. Last week I visited the IHAB, where I have the privilege to have a son working. And when you come to the IHAB, on the first floor, you find a shop for clothes. And you turn to the other side, you see a shop for Brazilian and plastic hair pieces. True? That the history of IHAB as a kind of what was it called? The Garissa Hotel? Garissa Lodge is still painfully present in the eyeball of Kenya's prestige as a rising, enterprising intellectual community. If we believe in the phenomenon of this talent and the capacity of ICT-driven innovativeness, apart from celebrating M-Pesa, where is the policy evidence that you're creating the space and infrastructure to nurture the talent that is so abundant and so much respected globally? You can't say we'll all keep it home until we reach Savannah City, which remains on a distant horizon all the time. If services is to drive this country, 3/4 of services in Kenya is dependent on Kenya Airways. Tourism services, whether it's conference tourism, sun tourism, or wildlife tourism, it's phenomenally dependent on Kenya Airways. But you know, typical Kenyan way of dealing with things, you find a problem, you say which side politically is responsible for the problem. Because once you put it into a political box, then you can apportion responsibility. To accuse, to nail someone is more important than to deal with the challenge as a nation. You have done that in the fight on terrorism. You are doing that with Kenya Airways. You're playing with very, very expensive and risky crisis as a nation. I do not know the final word about what's ailing Kenya Airways. There have been many different phenomenal things, judgment, overcommitment on stretched cash resources. But the reality is for the past decade, management has been declining. When you see an airline in dealing with disputes among its own crew, starts going into what is called wet leases, meaning we lease an airplane and we bring it with its own pilots. you know there is a phenomenally difficult problem of how to deal with human resources. When you see a company which seeks to jail leaders of trade unions, you know you are seeing a model of failed leadership. I remember one time Pope Francis, in visiting Assisi, was addressing nuns and said, I want to bring happiness, genuine happiness to nuns in the Catholic faith. I don't want to be seeing you putting on those air hostess smiles. It's a professional smiling. When I fly Kenya Airways these days, I even find I'm struggling to put on their professional smile. You are not telling the world that you are ready to compete with Ethiopian Airways and the inroads being made by Emirates and Turkish Airlines into African territory. And when you lose ground, historically, it's extremely difficult to get it back. But if the most you try to do when there's such a crisis is to apportion political blame between political parties, you are not ready for facing the challenges and responsibilities of the moment. And you're not building the foundation to grow the services sector as a major driver for national prosperity. I say this country is lucky because of its geography, and there are very many countries which wish they had the geography you have. You take for granted the privileges that were endowed to you by nature. Earlier this month, 2 months ago, I was at the World Economic Forum for Africa in Cape Town, and we had a breakfast hosted by Deloitte. And the general manager of Nissan Motors Africa, a very gruffy, very direct and straight-speaking German, said, you know, we in the enterprise world have been very celebratory about the rising possibilities in Africa. We see the rapid and steady growth of Ethiopia as potentially presenting one of the largest markets once a middle class starts growing out there. We see the phenomenal expansion of Nigeria, the steady growth of that country, even away from the traditional pillaging of the petroleum resources, particularly young, rich Nigerians who traditionally will be voting with their feet, aware of voting with their feet, to come into Nigeria and invest in Nigeria. And the possibilities of Nollywood and others are creating a consumer base that you cannot wish away. For South Africa, there is something you must worry. 10 years ago, most of the West did not know their geography. They looked at South Africa as a gateway to Africa. Since then, they have looked at the maps again, and they think that Nairobi and Lagos are closer to the heart of Africa than Cape Town. And that's the reality. Geography has put you in the path of Africa. Phenomenal entry point to the continent. But do you think big enough about what those opportunities mean? China decided that one way of expanding its commercial integration with Eastern Europe particularly, but even up to Western Europe, is to do an audacious new Silkway railway line, blasting across the mountains from China into Europe. When I was visiting Kazakhstan last year, I saw the phenomenal work going on. In Kyrgyzstan, dams, railways, and bridges are phenomenal being done by the Chinese. They are trying to reach a destination. Kenya has an entrepreneurial product that can be marketed across this continent. Kenya has produce that could have phenomenal market in Western Africa. Okay, West Africa buys Kenyan tea from London. If we are talking infrastructure, under the UN, we're all putting a price that every year Africa needs $93 billion to sustain the ambitious infrastructural integration that it needs. Purposeful action by countries like Kenya will be not to say, I want a railway line that goes to Burundi. Say, why don't we connect Lamu to Douale? Why don't we export under AGOA our products to America out of an Atlantic port? Why don't we deliver mangoes to Nigeria in real time, 24 hours after they're harvested in Kenya? Such thinking goes beyond the pettiness of looking at, I can import some low-cost maize from Douale in eastern Uganda, or export milk powder to Tanzania when there is a drought. You have the opportunity to expand the geographical scale of your ambition. But don't just expand the geographical scale of ambition without expanding a self-trust that you can be able to deliver on things. Now, this brings me to one of the more difficult challenges that I have thought I faced as a Kenyan. You see a lot of ability in the country. You see a lot of talent in the country. But you see a dead link between informed opinion and public practice. Let me put it a different way. When I have followed on Twitter, those of you who have been very, very positive about coming to this meeting, I was just reminded about how much young Kenyans particularly have been able to mobilize on social media to block, for example, the grabbing of a primary school, to raise a voice against bigotry, the naive insults from CNN. And the world noticed you. But you know, the same country that does that is comfortable every 5 years to do rituals of going through elections where they suspend common sense, choose the most best persons to be your leaders, and then 1 week after election start complaining about what kind of leaders you have. You are a society which is positioning itself for failure. You make nice statements about what you are capable of doing, but then you invest most of your resources to keep people politically happy. By the nature of my job, I attend most international developmental conferences around the world. I'm phenomenally surprised by how many Kenyan members of parliament and MCAs are on delegations abroad. I co-hosted a conference in Abu Dhabi, and the county of Marsabit had a delegation of 15 MCAs attending a conference in Abu Dhabi. Apart from the governor, none of the other members of the delegation entered the venue of the conference. At last count, 10 countries had written to Kenya's Minister of Foreign Affairs to request that you reduce the load we are suffering of having to offer courtesies to visiting members of parliament. In Geneva, at the annual conference of ILO, every country is allowed a delegation of 1 and 2, meaning the minister or head of government with the ambassador and the permanent secretary, mostly 3 people. Kenya brings a government delegation of 6, a delegation of 8 senators, and a delegation of 10 members of parliament. They stay through the 2 weeks, and they're given each $1,000 per diem every day. And it's painful for me to confess that occasionally I've received reports about transport for members of parliament seen in a red light district. That's taxpayers' money. That's use of public resources. That is the class of persons you're entrusting with leading you to what you politically call the next level. This society, like many other African countries, have a responsibility to prove to those who have faith that Africa can perform that you are trying to perform. It can't go on forever, that the rest of the world helps define that you are rising, grow a narrative that you are getting better. But when your actions, when we see young African men and women drowning off the island of Lampedusa in the Mediterranean, we don't see the demographic dividend. We see the demographic curse. When we see the level of public resources invested in financing a bloated political bureaucracy, we don't see a society aspiring to improve. We see a society hemorrhaging resources that should go into investing in infrastructure, in education, in health services, going to keep a large political class happy. The direction of your collective ambitions is not matched by the short steps you're taking in the allocation of public resources. And no country is going to give you their resources to do things you are not ready to do with your own resources. There are a number of challenges and a number of interesting opportunities. I'm sorry, I promised to speak for a few moments and I've been going forever.
Yeah, please, go on. Wow.
You see, as we look to how will Africa succeed, some of us say, if Africa has to succeed, surely Kenya should. Because you're one of the few places where there's genuinely a combination of human resource, climatic conditions, geographical location, substantial resources, and international goodwill, and a very good, warm people. If you can't succeed, how will Burundi succeed? But it cannot come by accident. It takes purposeful action, looking at the reality of the world today. You have to start building, you have to be the drivers of regional integration, because you gain from regional integration more than anybody else. Those who have something to put into the market are the ones who usually look for good roads. You have something to be the driver of regional integration. Not the regional integration of just negotiating customs union, lowered tariffs, right, of setting up businesses. I've always been amazed by what has happened in an area called the Greater Mekong River Valley, which is the region just south of China. The Mekong River runs from China and bordering areas of Laos, Cambodia, Myanmar, Vietnam, in that region. Now, in 1992-94, they were very, very different in their political cultures, many with dictatorships of phenomenal might and intent, like Myanmar, others with emerging democracy, others with chaos because of LDC status, like Laos. But they had a very interesting thing. They said, the best integration is not what government ministers sit together and with the benefit of expatriate advice start saying this is what we should do together. The best integration is to identify leaders of communities of entrepreneurs from the countries. Say, what is it that inhibits your maximizing benefit in this region? And what is it you want governments to do for you? And the leaders of enterprise in the Mekong Valley were saying, one, we need infrastructure. Two, we need development financing. And three, we need a clear market regulation about what we can send to which country. What has been the consequence of this? As China grows and outgrows its traditional role as the workshop of the world because of rising cost of labor, products that were being made in China are now being shifted to the low-cost economies of the Mekong Valley. The intellectual weight of East Africa is much higher than places like Cambodia, where Khmer Rouge killed every person who had a university education. The government sent children home as a patriotic duty. If your parents are educated, they represented capitalist enemies. Children went and killed their mothers and fathers. When Hun Sen came to power, there were not more than 10 people with their university education remaining in the country. That country today exports 8 million bicycles to European Union. What is it about yourselves? You have not had such a trauma. You import wheelbarrows from China, from India. There has to be a self-trust and a raised sense of ambition before people can help you get there. But I always say, he who has no destination cannot get lost. As the Americans say, if you are not going anywhere in particular, any route can take you there. So if you're not going anywhere in particular, you're just going through electoral cycles of comfort and discontentment and shift of political class to rule you and get to develop a bloated entrepreneurial class that feasts off state like this, you are not ready to compete. Today, petty manufacture like kettles, like air conditioners, should not be imported from East Asia to Africa. This region should be making those products for this market. After 20 years of importing Indian and Chinese motorbikes, Kenya should not be importing any completely built motorbike from anywhere in the world. Progressive taxation, progressive restriction should increase domestic value content to add value locally. And it's not rocket science to make sponges for sitting on a motorbike. But these realities have translated into public demand that policy reflects this direction of maturity. But the resources to invest in an infrastructure that enables this are being wasted on overpaying a large bloated political class, from county to national level, for financing irresponsible, reckless, and very negative trips by tourists from parliament and county assemblies. That is what is going to make a difference. That after glorifying the political class, societies usually translate to say, let us now start heroizing our entrepreneurs. Your own society, the celebration of entrepreneurs has to be reflected in shifting public resources towards building the core support for the entrepreneurs, build the core resources for a very competitive product in the market. I've been saying, after years of a massive quantitative expansion of education, that basically any person who wants a university degree, whether you passed your Form 4 exams or not, can get it. You have gotten to the point where you say, now the public must start investing in top-notch quality education for the brightest. They are going to be the drivers of the next generation of innovativeness. It can't just be a general education providing you with persons doing the things that others are not yet doing. But this requires a national dialogue that is away from winning political souls, that is driven by the reality that you live in a mean world where those who succeed, where the ambition to be a middle-income country, where the ambition to be creating value and doing things differently from how you have been doing them and doing some different things that you have not been doing, calls on exactly a total rethink of who you are, what you're capable of doing, and getting new models of relationship between enterprise, scholarship, civil society, and government. Thank you for your kind attention.